And we're live. Welcome back, everybody. It's the MongoDB Podcast Live. We're live on LinkedIn and YouTube. Thanks, everybody, for joining. We've got a great discussion planned for today. We're going to be focusing on microservices and specifically Kubernetes. So if you're a developer, you're building something, you want to deploy that in a microservices architecture, we've got some really great details for you today. My guest is Evis Drenova, and he works at a company called Nucleus. So we're going to dive into what Nucleus is, how it works. If you're coming into the stream, let us know where you're from. I'm on the East Coast of the United States as usual, and I'm in a little town called Yardley in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. I'm curious where you're dialing in from. All right, we've got some MongoDB fans. Izzadeen loves MongoDB. Welcome. Thanks so much for tuning in. Got a great show for you today. Prepare yourself for some information about microservices. We're titling this one, Building the Future of Microservices. And we've got some great content in that space. So get ready for that. If you've got questions about how you can improve your microservices architectures, how you can deploy more efficiently, get ready, get your questions ready. We've got an expert backstage waiting to join us. All right, Chicago, welcome, one of my favorite cities. Fondly remember MongoDB, MongoDB World, my first MongoDB conference where we went to Chicago and the river was painted green. So nice of them to do that for MongoDB. Welcome to the stream, everybody. Again, we're going to be focusing on microservices, how you can improve your microservices architectures and deployments. Our guest today is CEO and co-founder of a company called Nucleus. So stay tuned for that. Let us know where you're dialing in from. Well, Atlas is my favorite as well. Oyo Gafo Felix, welcome. Welcome to the stream. It's great to have you on board. We'll give it a second for other folks to get into the room. Usually like to go about 3 minutes welcoming everybody, find out where you're from, what your questions might be in the microservices space. This is a great question. Aklesh, when will MongoDB events happen soon in India? I think we're working on that. I don't have a specific answer for you, but I love to feature these questions because I'm getting quite a few of them. We need to focus on getting some events in India for sure. Thanks for your interest there. We do have an event coming up. It's in New York. You can see my background. Yes, so MongoDB.local is coming to New York. And we've got great news in that space. If you're looking to join us in New York, June 22nd, I'll be featuring a code that you can use to register. We'd love to have you there. We're going to be doing a podcast episode right from the event. Be interviewing some product people, some customers, featuring a lot of folks in the MongoDB community. So stay tuned for that. All right. Without further ado, I'd like to bring my guest on board. Evis, welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you on the show. How are you today?
Hey, Michael, I'm doing well. Doing really well. Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm really excited to dive into this because, I mean, is anybody really developing without microservices in mind today?
I think especially over the last 10 years, it's gotten more and more popular. Still a lot of complexity. I think that's the reason why we exist. But we talk to more developers and teams every day who are moving in that direction. So I think it's an exciting space.
Why is that? Why microservices?
It's a great question. I think at the end of the day, as a team, you really have to pick the architecture that makes the most sense for you. Whether it's microservices or even honestly a monolith, I think it's all about what makes the most sense for your business. What we've seen a lot over the last few years is that as teams start to get bigger, they naturally get a little bit more distributed. Sort of sub-teams start to form where they focus maybe on specific parts of a platform of a product. And naturally, those teams really want to operate with less dependencies. You sort of want to operate in your little bubble in some sense where you can commit your code. Maybe you can write it in your own favorite language, depending on what that particular service requires. And there's different technology solutions that make sense depending on what you're building. And so I think as those teams grow bigger and start to get a little bit more distributed in terms of operating within smaller teams, microservices starts to come up in conversations where teams want to run a little bit faster without having to coordinate with the entire engineering org. And so that's when those teams start to think about, hey, should we start thinking about moving towards a microservices architecture? And there's big companies that are doing this, at massive scale: Netflix, Stripe, LinkedIn, Uber, and so on. And they've had a lot of great successes. But sometimes companies don't have the resources of being Netflix or being Uber or Stripe. And so they start to move in that direction without really thinking strongly about how do we do this well. But that's what we've seen, is really start to move in those services direction.
Yeah. So before we get into the details of Nucleus and the solution that you've come up with, let's talk a little bit about your background. Now, you've been around for quite a bit and worked at a number of companies. Talk a little bit about your journey to getting to the place where you started Nucleus.
Yeah, I think I've had a pretty interesting journey. It's definitely been a lot of fun. Coming out of undergrad, I was actually a pre-med major. I took a few computer science classes. I loved sort of coding in my own free time. I was very science focused. Coming out of that, I decided, hey, I don't really want to do medical school. I want to do something a little bit different. And software just seemed like a lot of fun. It's something I was really interested in. So my first job was actually being an SDR. I was making 100 cold calls a day. And really just grinding. So I have a lot of respect, a lot of empathy for all the sales folks out there. I was one for several years, and it was great. It taught me a lot of amazing skills: how to present, how to speak, how to refine your language and your presentation. So I did that at a company called Experian for the first couple of years. So I actually came out of Boston and then moved out to San Francisco. And I came to San Francisco. That's when I started to really see what the startup ecosystem was about, what the venture ecosystem was about. So I knew I wanted to be in it one day, but I didn't feel like I was ready at the time. And so coming out of Experian, I went to Oracle for that to do sales as well, and did that for a bit. And that was also a lot of fun, trying to navigate sort of the Oracle org. And then after that, went to IBM and really became much more of a technical sort of developer, and really was writing code for the first year I was there, working on large sort of hybrid cloud implementation. So we were going into large Fortune 500 companies, typically banks and insurance companies. So, really legacy sort of environments, and replacing a lot of their on-prem systems with hybrid cloud implementations or just newer versions of on-prem. And so that was really fun. As a pretty young kid, early in my career, working in these sort of legacy environments while my friends were working on everything cloud native. But I think it definitely gave me a good appreciation of sort of where technology started and sort of how far it's come, and some of the challenges that these bigger companies really face as they're going from legacy architectures to more cloud native stacks. And so did that for a number of years as a management consultant there, led projects. That was also really, really fun. And then eventually moved over to being a product manager. And so did that at a company called Truedata. And that was really fun. We're building machine learning infrastructure, taking a lot of user data and trying to help brands and advertisers identify what's the next, who's the right user for us to serve an ad to. And that was really cool. It's, ad tech, I always joke, is it's one of those things that sometimes, people have very strong emotions about and strong feelings about. But the technology that's happening there and sort of the level of expertise is incredible. It's, you imagine in under 500 milliseconds, there's a lot going on just to serve you an ad that as a user, you don't really realize. But the ad tech ecosystem is really, really strong technically. So it's really fun to help, build out some of the machine learning models there to identify who's the next best user for a brand to serve an ad to. So did that for a number of years. And then most recently went to a company called Skyflow. And so was there fairly early as one of the first couple product managers, mainly building data privacy infrastructure. Spent a lot of time there working on our internal services platform, working on microservices, working on infrastructure. And I had been doing infrastructure, for about 5 or 6 years at this point, one way or the other, starting with IBM, and kind of always had this feeling in my mind where infrastructure can be a little bit in the weeds sometimes. It can be very technical, and people have strong feelings about it, and they're very opinionated, but it still seemed a little complex, and especially for companies who, for us at Skyflow, we provide an API to help other companies protect their most sensitive data. Infrastructure wasn't necessarily the product that we were selling. But yeah, we were spending a lot of time building out infrastructure because it was important. And so that's really when this idea started to come to mind. And I was talking to my co-founder, Nick, where we started to think about, how do we help give customers really flexible, secure, scalable infrastructure without spending 6 to 9 to 12 months that we had spent, Nick and I, at our respective companies building out. And so that's where the idea started to sort of germinate, and we eventually brought it forward into what is Nucleus today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I love the Skyflow mission. I mean, we're actually going to be talking with Sean Falconer.
Oh, great! Yeah, Sean's awesome.
Yeah, he's going to be on the show coming up in the next couple of weeks. So we'll learn a little bit more about Skyflow and data privacy and how they're creating this whole separate layer of the stack, really, for PII. So an interesting use case there. So you've got amazing experience, and I want to make sure I'm pronouncing your name right. Is it Evis or Evis?
It's Evis, yeah. So
Evis.
I call this without the L.
Okay,
Yep.
And you've mentioned that to me in the past, and I forgot. Okay, so it's Evis. Okay, so yeah, I mean, amazing experience across such a wide array of responsibilities. I can't think of a better way to get prepared to launch a company. So I also agree, like the consulting position where you're constantly moving from customer to customer, looking at all of the different problem spaces, gives you really great insight into a niche market where there's a need. Talk about the specifics of the Nucleus solution and the problem that it solves.
Yeah, certainly. So Nucleus is a Kubernetes developer platform that helps engineers, particularly developers, ship up to 5 times faster, while also automating a lot of repetitive tasks for DevOps and platform teams. And so when, my past experience, when we had been building these infrastructure platforms, one of the challenges that we had was there were a lot of components that you had to stitch together, depending on exactly the type of architecture that you needed. And the way that we had done it, and the way that most teams do it, is they take some typically open source tools and components. They kind of marry that together with whatever the cloud providers give, these primitives. So if you're on AWS, it's things like EC2 and like S3, and you're kind of building this amalgamation of an infrastructure that's very puzzle pieced. And that can be, one, technically complex. There's a lot of pieces to manage, and it's different, as building a prototype versus having a production ready system. There's a lot of different sort of considerations you really have to think about. And so for teams, when they want to get to that production ready system, that takes a lot of time to get there. And so there's the technical part of it, which is it can be technically complex and just take a long time because you have all these moving pieces. But then there's also the sort of the people aspect, which I don't think gets actually talked about enough, where it's actually really difficult to find developers who have a really wide range of expertise and who can build these systems well. You have to think about distributed computing, distributed applications, and how do I build a resilient distributed system? You have to think about security and how do we secure this? If you're a company that's dealing with customer data, security it's paramount. It's so important. And it's hard sometimes to find developers who have that security expertise, especially in distributed applications. You have to think about scalability. How do we scale this system to thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of requests, depending on our business model? And so to find a team of developers who understand all of those concepts deeply and deeply enough to actually build a system that represents those well is really hard. And so, what we wanted to do was come to market with a platform that helps other teams adopt what is a production-ready, scalable, secure, reliable system in a matter of days or weeks, instead of spending 6 to 9 to 12 months building it, testing it, and rolling it out themselves. And so that's the platform that we built at Nucleus. We do that specifically for service-oriented architectures. And so that's all the way from a couple of services all the way to very, very discrete microservices. You're running hundreds of microservices in an environment. And there's different requirements depending on where you are in that journey. If you're just running a couple of services, you're going to build that system just a little bit differently than if you're running hundreds of microservices. And so we try to give folks a path to go from a couple of services or even a monolith all the way to hundreds of services without having to re-architect or spend a lot of time kind of rebuilding what they've already built.
So how does the Nucleus solution surface to the developer?
Yeah, we have two sort of surfaces. One is our SaaS dashboard. We think of this as our control plane. I think one thing that's unique about what we've done at Nucleus is that we actually deploy Nucleus into your cloud environment. So today we support AWS, and then we're going to be rolling out GCP support within the next quarter. And so when we deploy Nucleus, we actually deploy it into your cloud account. So it runs on your infrastructure. So from a security, from a compliance standpoint, it all fits within your program, and none of your data actually leaves your account. We don't collect it, we don't store it. It all stays within your particular cloud account. And so we have a control plane, a dashboard that helps you manage this within your account. And then secondly, we have a CLI. And so for a lot of developers, it's really important from a developer experience perspective to stay within your native workflow, like stay within flow, right? Within your context. You're working in VS Code. You want to stay within that interface because that's where you work all day long. You don't want to have to constantly go back and forth. And so we built a CLI that you can effectively do everything you would do in the dashboard within the CLI. So you never have to leave your context of how you work. So those are the two sort of main interaction planes of Nucleus.
And so I like the concept. There's two surface areas, sort of like the infrastructure components, and then the actual closer to the code components that you get surfacing through whatever IDE you're using. Okay, terrific. Now, folks that are joining us, we're talking to Evis Drenova, and he is CEO and co-founder of Nucleus. There's a link on the banner there, nucleuscloud.com. You can go there and check that out. We're talking about becoming more efficient, deploying and managing microservices architectures with a product called Nucleus. If you've got questions, you can load them up in the comments. We'll try and get those answered. Now, what folks may not be familiar with is the fact that MongoDB works really well in the microservices environment. We've got the Kubernetes operator, and MongoDB is just a really great technology to be a part of your microservices deployment. How does Nucleus leverage and enable deployment of MongoDB?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we do this in a couple of different ways. One of the ways, and one of the things that we've done at Nucleus is really build out a library of integrations. And so we know that for a lot of developers, if you're working in a microservices architecture, you're sometimes having to do some very rote work to integrate your services with different integrations. Some of those may be databases, maybe container registries you want to pull an image from, observability tools. And so on the databases side, we knew that a lot of developers love MongoDB. We love it ourselves. We use it internally. And so we wanted to make it really easy for folks to be able to manage their MongoDB instances and connect to their MongoDB Atlas instances. So today we support Atlas. And so for developers who want to be able to make it easy for their services to securely connect to Atlas, we have an integration with it where you can provide us a connection string or a URL, and we'll actually surface that as environment variables within your service itself. So we make that integration of being able to talk to your Atlas instance really, really straightforward and really easy. What we do on top of that is actually more from a security angle. So one of the things that we built is an RBAC layer, so role-based access permissioning or control, where in a microservices architecture, you don't want every service to have access to your database if it doesn't need it, right? And so if you think of this from a zero trust perspective, that's kind of this buzzword in some ways that's been going around the industry for the last couple of years. You start from a position of least privileges, only the things that should have access to my database should have access to it. Everything else shouldn't have access to it. And so we implement a layer of RBAC on top of the integration, where as a developer, you can very easily say, only this service has access to my connection string that I use to connect to MongoDB. And you can do that with just a point and click interface. You can do that at the service level. You can do that at the environment level. And so another use case here is, let's say you have a development MongoDB instance and then a production MongoDB instance. You don't want your development services to, for whatever reason, have access to your production database. You don't really want your production services to accidentally talk to your development database. And so we provide a layer of RBAC at the environment level. So when you create a dev environment, you can say only my dev services should have access to my dev database, or separately, only my production services should have access to my production database. And so we kind of marry those two kind of sort of things together. One is make it really easy for developers to talk to their databases and to their integrations. And then two, add a layer of security and RBAC on top of that so that you can feel confident that only the things and only the services that are talking to my database should have access to it, nothing else.
And is that, when you talk about the integration between Nucleus and MongoDB, from an RBAC perspective, are you leveraging the MongoDB Atlas API and changing the access permissions list through the network? So we integrate directly with the API, and then we've started to explore the MongoDB. You mentioned the Kubernetes operator.
So we're pretty familiar with operators and have written a couple of those ourselves. And so we've started to explore that as well and to see if there's anything we can do there to help developers just use MongoDB a lot easier. And so that's generally our goal, is how do we remove a lot of the complexity and sometimes just the technical rote work that comes with integrating multiple systems or dealing with multiple systems, and help developers focus on what matters, which is just writing great business logic, writing great code that makes a difference to the end user. And so that's generally the mission that we're going for. And I think this is one of those use cases and areas where I think we've done a pretty good job of that.
Yeah. So if I'm a developer, I know I need to deploy in a microservices environment. I've got a team that I'm working with. A lot of the struggles that I've had in the past is understanding Kubernetes from the command line. Does Nucleus alleviate some of that complexity?
Yeah, certainly. So we've really focused on developer experience across the entire application, and we focused very heavily on it because we know that it's important. And as developers and engineers in the past, developer experience can sometimes make or break your product. And so we really wanted to make sure that we had sort of a world-class DevX. And so the way that we've built the product is to try to make it really easy for developers to deploy, to test, and to build new services. And so as part of our product, we have a built-in build pipeline. So you can get started from zero, not even having signing up for a Nucleus account, to having something live in a production-ready environment in less than 30 minutes on Kubernetes in your account. And so as a part of that, you can either start with source code. So let's say you're just working in your IDE and you have a service that you want to deploy. You can actually ship us that service using the Nucleus CLI, and we'll build an image for you, and we'll deploy that onto Kubernetes into the environment that you want for you directly. And we do that entire pipeline in less than 90 seconds. And so as a developer, if you're building, it becomes really simple to take something that you're working on locally and then deploy that onto your production environment or just any production ready environment without really having to think too much or having to think about, hey, I need to go build out and get a CI/CD pipeline. I have to write a Docker file. I have to make sure my images are being built correctly. I have to store that somewhere. Those are all things that we really want to help alleviate for developers. And so from a build perspective and a deploy perspective, we really spent a lot of time trying to make that pipeline as smooth as humanly possible and as fast as humanly possible. Second to that, the other thing I'd mention is some developers want to write their own Docker files, right? They're obsessive with multi-layer builds and they want to use the slimmest image possible and have sort of the smallest image possible. That's totally fine too. And so we also integrate with a whole bunch of container registries, Docker Hub, ECR, GitHub packages, and so on, where you can just point us to an image, and we'll actually pull that down from that container registry and deploy that for you. And so we've tried to be pretty flexible with sort of the inputs into the Nucleus system, whether it can be an image or it's source code. We kind of function with all those variations.
I'm just kind of floored by the claim, like up and running in 90 seconds. What does that get me? Are there pre-populated templates with certain technologies? Do I get a runtime environment? What kind of languages and environments are you supporting?
We support almost all the major runtimes. I'm not going to name them all, but pretty much every single one we support. We support most of the major sort of if you want to have a multi-environment sort of a system where if you have dev, stage, QA, and production, we support that. Depending on for example, we support AWS today. So depending on your AWS architecture, you may have a development account with a development environment, a production account with a production environment. Some other folks may have everything in one account, and you just have different clusters that represent different environments. We support all those different variations. So we're pretty flexible in terms of how you want to structure your account and how you want to structure your architecture, and then how you want to deploy, and then the support of the runtimes. We're pretty flexible on that as well. So we really try to not restrict the developer in terms of using their favorite runtime, using setting environment variables in the way that they want to set them, being able to deploy things in the way that they want to deploy them. We try to say, hey, look, we support any of those paths, and we want to make them all really, really straightforward. And then we've also built a whole bunch of sort of utility features, as I think of them, just to make particularly DevOps and platforms life a whole lot easier. So I think one of my favorite ones is the ability to clone a wholesale environment. And so a good use case for this is, let's say you're doing SOC 2 and you're going through, you want to do some pen testing. What you don't want to do is you don't want to give your security team an environment that doesn't really look like your production environment. Maybe it has different settings, different configurations, different environment variables. You really want to give them something as close to your production environment as possible without actually giving them your production environment. And so one thing that we've built out is the ability to clone an entire environment down to the configurations, the services, the integrations, the settings, the configurations, so that in just a couple clicks, you can effectively make a clone of your current production environment, give that off to your security team. They can do their pen testing in a production-like environment that mimics it, and feel really confident that, hey, we're testing as close to the real thing as possible, without having to do days of DevOps work to stand up in your cluster and see your configurations. And like, you've been through this before. It's painful, right? You have a long to-do list and you're like, is everything set correctly? And that's manual work that nobody really wants to do. And so those are one of the, that's one use case that we support. And there's a whole bunch of them around cloning environments that we're really excited about.
Yeah. So the cloning process, I mean, you nailed it. Like it's so valuable to be able to do that with limited effort. Is it a requirement to be in Nucleus in order to leverage that cloning environment? Or can I bring a pre-configured microservices environment to Nucleus and have that work?
Yeah, so today it is a requirement to be a Nucleus, but it's something that we're building out, is to actually bring your own microservices architecture, to bring your own environment, your own cluster. So that's something we're going to be working on spinning up here probably within the next 1 to 2 months. We talked to a lot of customers who say, hey, I have an existing Kubernetes environment, but it can be a little painful to manage. How does Nucleus sort of absorb that? And so we're building hooks to be able to hook into your current environments, to be able to leverage all the features that we've built without necessarily having to start with us.
Yeah, great. So we do have some questions. Are you down to field some questions from the audience? Okay. So there are competitive technologies out there, and maybe you work alongside them, maybe you work with them, but it does sound like you're describing some of the same capabilities that a Pivotal Cloud Foundry may provide. How does Nucleus compare to Pivotal Cloud Foundry?
Yeah, it's a good question. I've talked to the Cloud Foundry team before and a few engineers there. I think in some ways we can be a little bit similar. In a Cloud Foundry, at least from my experience, was very open source. I think we try to take a very sort of opinionated approach in terms of how you use the platform. We want to say, hey, look, setting up a cluster in one way is like setting up a cluster with these settings is, in our opinion, the best way to do it. Now, the nice thing is it's always in your account, so you can always go in and update any settings that you want to do, any configurations that you want. We've tried to make that very straightforward from a developer experience perspective. You don't have to use a CLI to clone down environments, for example, or set certain settings. You can just use the UI to do that if you want to. So I think with Cloud Foundry and some of these open source tools, these are great tools, but at the end of the day, they do leave a lot to the developer to still have to figure out. They give them a suite of tools and they're like, hey guys, like this is really powerful, but you're kind of in charge of figuring out how do I put these tools together to make the thing that I want work. Where we take just a little bit of a more opinionated approach, which is, hey, let's start from a use case perspective and give you a very good golden path to be able to get there with sort of advanced settings along the way. So I think we can be similar in some ways, but I think we do take a little bit more of an opinionated approach.
Great. Okay. Love that answer. We've got a question around encryption techniques. So I'm not sure if this is going to be too specific for Nucleus, but I'll let you take a swing first, and then I'll add in.
Yeah, I mean this brings me back to my Skyflow days. Check out
so
Skyflow.
I'm gonna just read the question just in case folks are listening.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. So are there any recommended encryption techniques for protecting sensitive data? It goes back to our Skyflow.
Yeah. I'd say check out Skyflow. They're great. Love my time there. The team there is amazing. I think as far as Nucleus goes, we don't deal too much in PII or just sensitive data. Purposely try not to collect that and we definitely don't store it. As far as encryption goes, generally within microservices architectures, there are a couple of best practices that I'd recommend. One is if you have private services, so those that are not available to the outside internet, you really want to be using something like MTLS to be able to secure messaging communication across those services, even if they're in a private VPC. And so I remember having a conversation with the CTO just about 2 months ago. And what he had said was, he was like, hey, look, our team is now about 80 developers. And as a leader in the org, I've now had to start to think about something that I never really had to think about in the past, which is sort of the rogue engineer. And it's a risk at the end of the day. You kind of wish it never happens, but it's something you have to protect against. Or somebody just somehow getting into your private VPCs. And the right thing to do is really to protect and encrypt that communication, that inter-service communication, as opposed to having everything done over HTTP and having everything plain text. So that's one thing that we make really easy on the Nucleus side, is to be able to do that just with effectively just one setting. But as far as encrypting or protecting sensitive data, check out Skyflow. They do a good job at it.
Check out Skyflow.
A little plug for there.
Right?
I'll ask Sean to give me a plug back when you guys chat with him.
Absolutely. And we'll have Sean Falconer. I think he's heading up product at Skyflow. So we're going to have him on the live stream in, I think, a week or two. I'll update the show notes with the specifics on Skyflow if you want to check that out. But there's also MongoDB's field level encryption. So if you're storing data and it's PII and you're not leveraging Skyflow, you may want to consider using queryable encryption. So this is a great technology that we've onboarded into the MongoDB stack. It gives you the ability to implement field level encryption. It's never really exposed to the end user, only through the set of keys. So definitely check out field level encryption. I don't have a link at the moment. Hope that answered your question, Khalid. We have another question from Michael Card, and he's asking about average costs. It might be tough to answer just as that is, but he does add some additional context. So enterprise, he's asking for average cost for an enterprise deployment, enterprise being about 30 microservices and 3 environments. Are you willing to take a swing at an estimate there?
Always happy to. I'll start off by saying, we, from a pricing perspective, we don't price and we don't meter usage. We don't meter users. We just charge an enterprise license. It's one of the benefits of being a small company is that we're still pretty flexible in the pricing terms. Mm-hmm. You can create as many environments, as many services as you want, and everything comes pre-configured. For an enterprise environment of 3 environments with 30 microservices, I would, without knowing the specifics, of course, I would say probably in the range of somewhere to 40 to 60K a year. I think would be reasonable for that type of environment. But I think Michael, always happy to chat further and get into specifics. But that's generally where we tend to kind of be around for those enterprise type of environments. Yeah,
and we'll send folks to nucleuscloud.com. So we're talking with Evis. Is it Drenova?
Drenova, yep.
Drenova, Evis Drenova, CEO and co-founder of Nucleus Cloud, enhancing the way that you deploy microservices environments, specifically with Kubernetes, with a Kubernetes spin on that. Happy to take your questions if you've got them. I'm curious about the transition to becoming a co-founder. Now, you've done so much in your background. How has the challenge of being a CEO and co-founder stressed different aspects of your capabilities?
It's honestly been a really interesting journey. I think to your point, like I've done a couple different things in my career, and in some ways I tried to do those a little purposefully. Where one day if I did want to become a co-founder or founder, that I'd have a sort of a jack of all trades, master of none kind of thing. Like I've done maybe a little bit of marketing, a little bit of product, I've done some engineering, where I could be a little bit dangerous, but I'd always defer to the actual experts, but I at least generally know what's going on. So I think that's been helpful in some sense. I think working at early stage companies has been extremely helpful. So my time at Truedata and at Skyflow, definitely prepared me a lot for, how do you just get something off the ground? How do you get people interested? How do you think about positioning and messaging and sort of the framework there? So I think that's been really interesting. Outside of that, one thing I didn't expect was that there's just a lot of admin work as part of being a co-founder. A lot of things you don't think about. It's fun.
What do you mean by admin? What do you mean by admin work?
It's one of the. It's like you're dealing with legal and you're dealing with insurance companies. Like we're moving offices right now, for example, and I'm the liaison between our insurance provider and our new office building. And it's a lot of those things. And it's like the sort of less sexy side of being a co-founder. It's sometimes you just have to, paying invoices, right? Setting up invoicing systems and some of the, not as fun stuff, but still really important at the end of the day. So outside of that, I love being a co-founder. It's been the most challenging yet rewarding and humbling experience I've definitely ever had. There's something about trying to start something and facing a lot of no's, significantly more no's than yeses that you'll ever face, that really force you to refine, your thesis and your thought process and how you communicate. And it's really humbling at the same time. You kind of really have to boil yourself down to what am I good at? And what can I, who can I bring in to sort of fill in the the things that I'm not very good at that we really need help on. And sort of being able to ask for help has been a fun journey to get to. And so having great investors, great friends, great coworkers has made all the difference.
Talk about the investors. Who's backing you these days?
Yeah, we have a great team of investors. So Soma Capital is an investor in us, Lombard Street Ventures, Asymmetric Capital Partners, Unbound VC, Line of Capital Partners. We have a whole bunch of angels as well. And so they've been just an amazing resource for us to go to and ask for help, whether it's, hey, we're looking to hire, another engineer. Do you guys have anybody in your network, or do you have folks that you can connect us to? For example, I reached out to our investors recently. I said, hey, I'm starting to think a little bit more about content writing and trying to build, a voice for Nucleus in the market. Can you guys connect me with anybody who's done this well? And immediately, I got 4 or 5 emails back saying, yep, you should talk to this person who's done this successfully at, this company. And so having that network has been completely invaluable. Like, I can't imagine not having it, because they're just a group of folks who just want to help. And as long as you reach out to them for help and sort of empower them in the right way, then they can be really helpful for you.
I think the toughest part, so I've worked a lot with startups. I helped launch and run the MongoDB for Startups program. You can get more information at mongodb.com/startups. If you've got a great idea and you're looking to get some assistance from MongoDB, you can check that out, mongodb.com/startups. And I think the thing that I hear over and again from founders is it's difficult to establish a good, solid network. How did you meet and get introduced to the VCs that ended up backing you?
Yeah, we went through YC. We were a YC Summer 22 company. And so being part of that network was extremely helpful. And, I think, any accelerator can do that, but YC was just, fantastic at it. So having a group of, I think you kind of have to split up your network. Like, I think it's really important to have a founder group that you can relate to and that you can talk to, who kind of cut through all the noise and really give you their honest feedback. And it's nice to talk to somebody else who's at the same phase as you. And so that's been really helpful, reaching out to the YC network for that. I've also found generally other founders who I have never known. I just, cold emailed or messaged on LinkedIn have been extremely helpful. So I think, as a co-founder, as a founder, the sometimes struggle and the highs and lows of being one. So you're typically more than willing to help other co-founders who are in that space as well. So, just not being afraid to reach out and ask and just say, hey, this is where I'm at. How have you guys done this? I've seen that you've done such a good job at it. I'd love to chat for 15, 20 minutes, can make the difference. And I've just been, floored at how helpful people who don't know me, don't owe me anything, have just been willing to lend their time, people in really sort of successful positions. So I think you have to be proactive in building that network. I think you have to reach out and not be afraid to ask for help, and try to find pockets, ask for recommendations. If you talk to one person, hey, do you have anybody else in your network who'd be willing to chat with me for 15 minutes? And so I think that's the best way that I found to do it is it has to be intentional and has to be, you have to be active in doing it and trying to build that network. It's not just going to come to you.
Yeah. And I think this is where your background in sales and customer interactions really comes to play. It's great that you have that range of personality. I find sometimes the more technical founders struggle in that space. So that's great advice. What additional advice might you have for somebody that's got a great idea? They want to get the thing off the ground.
Yeah, I think it's maybe going to sound a little cliche, but I think just do it. I remember early on before we founded Nucleus, I got introduced and talked to a really successful private equity investor who had started a company in the early 2000s. And I was kind of like giving him a little bit of a soft pitch where I was like, hey, this is kind of what I'm thinking about doing. I'm pretty interested in it. I think it has, really good opportunity. And he kind of just sat me down and was like, just do it. He's like, you're going to overanalyze and you're going to overthink everything, but all of that is almost going to be thrown to the side when you actually start doing the thing. And you're going to realize then what's actually important. And so what I took away from that was like, just don't overthink it. If you feel passionate about it and it's something that you've experienced yourself and it's something that you're going to feel good about working, 12, 14, 16 hours a day at, just start it and see where it goes. And at the end of the day, I really do think that within startups, you kind of like fail up in some sense where no matter what the outcome is, you're going to have learned so much more about the technology, but also yourself, about how to talk to people You're going to learn all these skills because you're kind of forced to. And so I would say just start it. Start small. Start talking to customers. Ask them if they have this problem. Ask them if they'd be willing to buy it without really having anything ready. And then you'll start to get some real feedback and kind of manage yourself in some ways, like manage your own psychology of like, okay, somebody told me no. How do I feel about that? How am I responding to that? Can I continue to kind of face adversity and overcome it? So I think all that boils down to just get started in one way or another and see where it takes you.
Yeah. Did you get any gut punches? Did you get any real negative feedback that kind of made you question?
Yeah. I mean, I think, one of the biggest things when we first started was being an infrastructure company. A lot of people asked us, why not open source? We're not an open source company, at least not today for sure. But a lot of investors asked, why not open source? I'm not going to invest unless it's open source. So, Nick and myself, my co-founder, we really had several moments where we kind of sat down and we're like, I don't know, man, we keep hearing the same thing over and over again. Like, should we be doing this? But we didn't believe at the time that it was the right thing to do. And that's not to say maybe it will be the right thing to do. But at the time we said no. And those felt like gut punches a lot because we were like, hey, look, we felt this pain ourselves. We built these, like, we know that this is a problem. We've gone on and talked to the market. And it's tough, when you keep getting no's, you kind of have to take stock of yourself, and say like, hey, is this something I'm still willing to continue to go through because I believe in it? And I think those are the moments that you kind of really figure out, do you have the conviction that you thought you had? Because, when everything's going great, everything goes great. But it's really when you get faced with that adversity, that's when you really kind of like figure out, do I actually believe in this? And do I really want to go through with this and go through the pain that I may go through?
Yeah, that's great advice. So Michael Card is back with some additional follow-up questions. He's looking for a comparison between the subscription cost and the value the platform adds. I think this is just I'm sure you've gotten this question from the VCs. Like, what is the value?
I love it.
Yeah.
Maybe this is the first time we're ever doing like a live sale on your podcast. I don't know, but I'm super happy to do it. For sure. I think the value add that we've seen as we talk to customers, there are kind of 2 or 3 main points. One is a 40% increase in developer productivity, and that's mainly through the automation that we provide. And so because a developer isn't having to spend time integrating different tools, managing those integrations as the stack around you changes in some ways, there's a lot of time that devs now get back to focus on actually building features and shipping faster. The second thing is we see around 300 to 400K in DevOps cost savings. Part of that is just a gain in productivity because we're automating some of these manual repetitive tasks. They're able to be productive in other ways, but then also extending the runway or empowering the team that you already have. If you're making a decision between, hey, do I go buy a Nucleus or do I go hire this additional DevOps person? If we can come in and potentially extend the runway of your current team and empower them, that's money that you're saving from having to onboard, having to train, having to find and retain, this additional hire while making your current team better. And so those are some of the things that we've seen across our current customers and that we like to talk about because we think they're pretty valuable and important. And when you back into that, we come at a pretty heavy discount to the value that you actually end up seeing. And so, you make a decision on, do I want to hire? Do I want to build this thing out and shift the focus of my team? Or do I want to go buy something off the shelf that can help me get started today? Help me get real feedback on the core product that actually makes me money. That's where I think we can be valuable.
Yeah. So if you're just tuning in, we're talking about deploying more efficiently in the microservices environment. The company is Nucleus. You can get more information at nucleuscloud.com. And then Michael Card adds, are you willing to talk to me?
Yes, I will.
Okay,
I'll find you on LinkedIn, Michael. I'm pretty good at it, and I'll shoot you over a message.
Awesome. So we'll have links in the show notes to some of the things that we covered today. Evis, anything else that people need to know about Nucleus?
I think we've talked a lot. I think the last thing I'll mention is, we're a team based in San Francisco. We love what we do. We're passionate about this stuff. We're a lean team. We work hard, work fast. I think one of the perks of being a small company is that at the end of the day, what's more important to us is that we have successful, referenceable customers who have seen value in what we're doing. If you don't see value in what we're doing, then, we're not doing the right thing. And so at the end of the day, we want to work with other customers who are willing to take a bet on us. I think that's one thing that doesn't sometimes get talked about a lot, at least publicly. I know it definitely does within my founder, group friends or friends group, where a lot of the times you're looking for somebody to take a chance on you, especially in the really, really early days. And you're willing to say, like, I am willing to put everything on the line to make you happy and make you successful at what you're doing. And so I think as an early stage company, we can do that. And we're always looking to do that with new customers. And as we grow, I think we'll continue to do that. But, give the young guys a chance, give the early guys a chance. And I think, you'll be surprised at what we can do.
I may be putting you on the spot, but are you able to talk a little bit about some of the customers that have taken that chance early on?
Yeah, I can definitely talk about it. So we have a few customers. We've got a few biotech customers. I think they've been really happy with the fact that we can deploy into their account. So from a compliance standpoint, it becomes really nice and really easy. We have a couple SaaS-based customers. They're great. They're starting to get on Kubernetes, and that's been the value for them is not spending sort of 6 months figuring out how do I deploy things, how do I set the cluster. And then we have a couple of early stage customers as well. And so for those folks, it's how do I get my product out to market quickly. And then we have a couple mid-market enterprise customers, and they've been great because they really push us. And I think you always need customers to push you a little bit and kind of broaden your scope. So we have some of those customers as well. Some of them, 2 fintech customers, and then 1 insurtech customer, or close to being customer. I won't sort of jump the shark there.
Don't jinx it. So Krishna is asking about AI. Are you thinking about this as you build the product?
We are. Yeah, we definitely are. I think, AI within infrastructure is really interesting for a couple of reasons. One is there's just a lot of files to go around. Everybody talks about YAML hell, config hell. It's a real thing, especially if you're just dealing with Kubernetes kind of directly or EKS directly. You deal with a lot of files. And so if there's anything that can help you make sense of that and can help you maybe generate that could be really interesting. I think secondly, there's a ton of telemetry data that gets thrown off, particularly within Kubernetes and infrastructure environments. And so how do you use that data to make smarter, more cost-effective decisions for your infrastructure and for your organization? So I think there's a lot of value there from an AI ML perspective, both from are we using the right instance types based on the compute that we want and the traffic that we're seeing? Are we maybe oversized in our instance types? So should we be going down? Yeah, I think AI can help there. The other area where I think AI can be really helpful within infrastructure is just managing kind of how your compute runs and trying to figure out, hey, am I running in the right region? Is this the right sort of platform that I should be running on? I think it can be helpful. We're experimenting with all of that. Another area is root cause analysis. Everybody, most infrastructure engineers have had the experience of kubectl into your pod and try to figure out your logs, but something's broken. And that can be a painful process. So can AI and ML help me with root cause analysis? That can be really interesting too. So we're kind of exploring all of those and seeing what makes sense for us at the time.
Yeah. So what's on the roadmap? What's coming down the pike for Nucleus?
The big thing for us is support for GCP. We're really excited about that. The ultimate vision at some point is to be very, very multi-cloud, really cloud agnostic. We believe you should be able to deploy a microservices architecture on Amazon. You should be able to transparently back that up to GCP if you want. And because we also work at the networking level, we can help manage the load balancing and the routing of requests as they come in. So if for whatever reason some of your AWS infrastructure goes down, your customers shouldn't experience a decline or degradation in service because your GCP backups have come immediately online. So that's the sort of ultimate far goal. But for us, GCP is next. Another one is ephemeral Kubernetes environments. Something we're really excited about is to come out and offer on every single PR push, you should be able to spin up a preview environment for your services that you can actually share with other folks. And so if you're a product team building new features, you should be able to ship or share it with the product management team, with the UI UX team, with other engineering teams. That's something we see a lot of is a request for just better local development, especially within microservices architectures, right? You have all these different services. If you change one, you can unit test that individual one. It becomes really hard to understand, well, did this break something else that I don't have visibility into? And so we think that these ephemeral environments can help developers close the loop on really testing things thoroughly and feeling confident about what they're pushing. That's coming down the pipeline. Blue-green deploys are coming down the pipeline. Better, of course, UIs and UX is always coming down the pipeline. So lots of things that we're working on that we're really excited about.
Terrific. Well, we'll send folks to nucleuscloud.com, and I understand you can sign up for free.
Yeah, you can sign up for free. We have a free forever account. Check it out, try it out. Let me know your thoughts, please. It's something that as an early stage company, we're always looking for thoughts and honest feedback on. So don't feel, don't feel like you're hurting my feelings. I want the real things. Tell me.
Mm-hmm. How do people provide feedback to you?
You can. So on our website, you can actually book time with me directly on my calendar at a time that works well. So we have a Calendly integration there. Or send me an email, evis@nucleuscloud.com. Obviously I check all of that and I'll get back to you as soon as I can.
Terrific. Well, I've loved the conversation, enjoyed learning more about Nucleus. I feel like I'm coming away with a great deal of knowledge today. So I want to thank you for that. Anything else to add before we wrap?
No, I think this has been great. I appreciate you having me on and giving me an opportunity to spread the gospel just a little bit. Hopefully, we've been able to help some folks in the audience, and looking forward to chatting with folks, especially Michael. I'll definitely be reaching out.
Right on. Awesome. Evis, thank you so much.
Thanks, Michael. I appreciate it. Yep. Cheers.
Okay, we just